The stars had been quiet for 100 years. A century had passed since the last major war, a conflict that had burned itself into the memory of every living species across the galactic rim. In those years of silence, trade routes flourished, colonies multiplied, and the great city-stations of the spiral arms became symbols of prosperity. Among the older races, there was talk that the galaxy had finally entered an age of balance, a time when conflict had given way to mutual survival. But balance was a fragile thing, and beneath the polished metal of the great stations and the bustling glow of new colonies, tensions simmered. Every species remembered slights and grudges, old wars and betrayals. The alliance of civilizations was no true brotherhood, merely a network of fragile treaties and reluctant agreements. And in that galaxy of cautious compromise, humanity remained an anomaly. The humans had come late to the stars, pushing their way outward with a reckless determination that others had mocked. They had built fleets without the refined technology of the ancients, their ships heavy and crude in the eyes of those who had been sailing the void for millennia. Yet the humans had spread like wildfire, colonizing inhospitable worlds others had ignored, thriving on barren rocks where no one else had cared to settle. Their stubbornness had carried them into prominence, and though some called them brash and unrefined, no one could deny their influence. It was humanity, above all others, who now urged caution. On a cold morning aboard the orbital station above the planet Haldrin, the Council of Worlds assembled. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber, their forms a dizzying array of physiology. Scaled diplomats who hissed through rebreathers, avian envoys whose feathered crests shifted with their moods, and crystalline beings whose voices rang like wind chimes when they spoke. The humans sat at the edge of the chamber, 5 figures draped in simple navy blue robes, their faces worn by the weight of responsibility. The debate was fierce. "The reports are unsubstantiated," hissed a tall, insectoid delegate whose mandibles clicked in agitation. "Ships go missing on the fringes every cycle. Colonies fail. This is not evidence of some phantom menace." Across the chamber, the human envoy rose. He was a broad-shouldered man named Elias Varro, a veteran of more than one war. His voice carried with it the calm authority of one who had seen battles fought in fire and vacuum. "These are not routine losses," Elias said, his words echoing through the hall. "A pattern is forming at the edge of known space. Whole colonies have gone silent. Survey craft record gravitational disturbances where none should exist. And there are ruins older than any of us care to admit, that speak of a threat buried deep in history. Do you truly wish to gamble the lives of your people on the hope that these warnings mean nothing?" A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some shifted uneasily, recalling half-whispered legends passed down through their own histories. Others scoffed, unwilling to yield ground to the ever-ambitious humans. "The galaxy is full of myths," sneered the representative of the Drask, a reptilian warlord race who resented humanity's growing power. "Your kind sees ghosts where there are only shadows. Perhaps your fear of the unknown blinds you." Elias held the gaze of the Drask and did not flinch. "Fear of the unknown has kept us alive. Ignoring it has ended civilizations." The chamber broke into arguments, voices rising, overlapping, until the presiding arbiter struck the dais with a booming tone that silenced all. The debate was not resolved, merely postponed, as so many before it had been. The council dispersed in uneasy silence, each delegation retreating to whisper among their own. That night, Elias stood at the wide viewport of his quarters, gazing at the stars. Beyond the settled regions lay the rim, a place of darkness and forgotten ruins. He thought of the reports he had seen, fragments of messages from outposts on the edge, desperate calls for help that ended in silence. He thought of the crumbling inscriptions recovered from ancient worlds, warnings etched in stone by civilizations long turned to dust. Something was stirring out there. He could feel it like a weight in his chest, a pressure that no words could relieve. Humanity had been underestimated before. They had been called reckless, foolish, stubborn, and yet again and again they had survived. Elias knew that when the truth revealed itself, the galaxy would look to humans, not out of respect, but out of desperation. And humanity would not turn away. Far across the void, on the desolate husk of a world no living thing had walked in 10,000 years, something vast shifted in the dark. Deep beneath blackened stone, machinery older than memory rumbled to life. Shadows lengthened across the surface as towers long buried clawed their way upward. The silence of the dead planet broke with a sound like grinding metal, a voice rising from the deep. The old ones were waking, and the galaxy, blind in its complacency, would soon remember why their name had been spoken only in whispers. The first disappearance came quietly. On the rimward side of the galactic spiral, a small human colony known as Karian Outpost simply stopped transmitting. At first, there was little alarm. Outposts failed from time to time. Power grids collapsed, storms fried communication relays, and frontier worlds often endured months without contact before they re-established their links. But when the relief ship arrived 6 weeks later, it found nothing but silence. The colony was gone. Buildings that had stood in neat rows were reduced to crumbled foundations. Machinery was ripped apart as if by claws larger than any natural beast. The soil itself was blackened, scorched in sweeping arcs that defied explanation. The relief crew found no survivors, no bodies either. It was as though every living thing had been plucked from the world and carried into the void. The only trace of what had happened came from a shattered comm relay. Its last recorded signal was distorted almost beyond recognition, the voice of a terrified woman cutting in and out. They came from the shadows, black ships, sky is burning. The recording ended in static. Word spread quickly among the human colonies, whispered in taverns, in the quiet corners of stations, and across the encrypted channels of military commands. But when Elias Varro brought the report before the Council of Worlds, it was dismissed. An unfortunate accident, muttered the crystalline ambassador of the Thriss, their faceted bodies shimmering faintly under the chamber lights. Perhaps a geological catastrophe. The rim worlds are unstable. Elias slammed his hand down on the table, startling more than one delegate. Do you truly believe a quake rips machines apart and leaves no trace of a population? Do you truly believe voices cry out of the void for help because of an earthquake? The Drask representative hissed a laugh. Perhaps your people engineered this yourselves to spread fear. It would not be the first time humans stirred trouble for gain. The debate descended into accusations and counter-accusations, and once more the council did nothing. Weeks later, another report came in. This time, it was not a colony but a fleet. The Vayari, a proud and ancient avian species whose wingspan unfurled like banners of fire, had dispatched a patrol squadron into the rim. 9 ships vanished. Only one limped home, hull scorched, engines burning, her crew half dead from radiation exposure. The message they carried was fragmented, the recording distorted by battle damage, but the images were unmistakable. Black ships, vast as cities, gliding without light. Their surfaces writhed with shifting geometry, shapes that the eye could not hold for long. Weapons fire lanced into them, but the beams seemed to vanish, swallowed by their dark hulls. In return, the black ships unleashed bolts of energy that tore through the Vayari vessels as if their shields were paper. The single surviving captain spoke before she collapsed into a coma. Her words would be repeated in council chambers, on news feeds, in whispered fear across the stars. They bleed shadows. The void bends around them. They are not new. They have been here before. Historians were summoned. Old records were unearthed, scrawled across fragments of stone and etched into alien ruins. In archives forgotten by most, humanity's scholars found references that sent chills down their spines. The enemy had a name, the Esha. No one knew where the Esha had come from or what they truly were. Some described them as a species of machines, others as flesh twisted into something unnatural, others still as both. What was known was simple and terrifying. The Eshar had once ruled the stars. They had waged wars not for territory or resources, but for extermination. Entire civilizations had been burned away beneath their fleets. Their reign had lasted millennia, broken only when the Eshar withdrew without explanation, sinking into dormancy in forgotten corners of the galaxy. Their return had been foretold in fragments, carved warnings left behind by the dead. When the shadows bleed, read one inscription, the stars themselves will be prey. The Council of Worlds fractured, some demanded immediate mobilization, others insisted it was a hoax, an illusion, a phantom conjured by humanity and their allies. The Drask warlords seized the chance to rail against humans, claiming they spread fear to secure more power. Through it all, Elias Varro remained firm. "They are real," he told the chamber. "They are awake, and if we do not unite now, they will devour us one by one. They nearly ended the galaxy once. Do not give them the chance to finish the task." But unity was hard to find. Fear gnawed at every species, but fear also made them cling to selfishness. Refugee fleets already began to appear as outlying systems emptied. Rumors spoke of deserters in the Vayari navy. The old rivalries of the galaxy returned, even in the face of annihilation. Only humanity seemed unwilling to fracture. On Earth, in the colonies, in the sprawling shipyards of Mars and Luna, war production began in earnest. Old vessels were recommissioned. New ones were forged in fire. Fleets gathered at rally points, and across human space, a single phrase spread like wildfire: "They shall not pass us." Far beyond human space, deep in the rim, the Eshar stirred. Their ships slid from ancient vaults carved into dead moons, black and silent. Stars reflected off their shifting hulls, only to be swallowed by their impossible angles. They gathered in silence, a storm building in the void, and when at last they moved, the galaxy trembled. The Eshar struck first at the Vayari heartworld. It began without warning. Black ships appeared on the edge of the system, sliding from the void as if they had always been there, waiting just beyond the reach of perception. They moved in silence, gliding past the orbit of outer moons, their dark forms blotting out the light of the stars. By the time the planetary defense fleet scrambled, it was too late. The Vayari fought with pride and fury, their golden ships rising in formation, wings of flame trailing behind them as their thrusters burned. But the enemy did not fight like any known foe. The Eshar absorbed their barrages, shields bending reality around them until beams of energy fizzled like sparks. When the Vayari pressed their attack, the black ships answered with bolts of void fire that shattered ships in a single strike. The battle was short, merciless, and final. Hours later, the skies above the Vayari homeworld burned with falling wreckage. The great spires of the capital city shook as fire rained from the heavens, and then came the silence. The Eshar did not claim the planet. They did not land troops or establish garrisons. They simply obliterated its defenders and moved on, leaving the survivors trembling beneath the shadow of annihilation. The news rippled across the galaxy like a shockwave. Entire civilizations panicked. Armadas that had once been proud scattered. Colonists fled their homes. Politicians spoke of negotiation, of appeasement, of retreating into the depths of their own territories to ride out the storm. The ancient pride of the Vayari had been broken, and with it, the last illusions of safety. Yet when the Council of Worlds convened in chaos, it was humanity that stood defiant. On the war platform orbiting Haldren, leaders argued and screamed across the council chamber. The Thriss accused the Vayari of arrogance. The Drask demanded the immediate withdrawal of all fleets to guard their own territories. The feathered envoys of the Serican simply wept for their lost allies. When Elias Varro rose, the noise did not cease at once, but gradually voices dimmed. Humanity was young, yes, but the eyes of the human env burned with something the others lacked: resolve. "You have seen what we face," Elias said, voice steady as stone. "You have seen how they fight. They do not conquer, they do not enslave, they annihilate. There will be no peace, no surrender, no bargaining. There is only survival or extinction, and we will not survive by retreating behind walls." We will only survive if we stand together. His words rang through the hall. Some scoffed, others whispered among themselves, but in that moment, a seed took root. The galaxy was afraid, but it was also desperate, and desperation has a way of seeking out those who will fight when others falter. The first test came days later. An HFY vanguard fleet pierced into human territory, sweeping toward the colony of Daedalus Prime. The humans gathered every ship they could muster, 70 vessels, a fraction of what the great powers might have once fielded, but enough to stand a chance if they fought with precision. The fleet was commanded not by politicians, but by soldiers, veterans who had clawed their way up through wars of survival rather than ceremonial rank. The HFY came as they always did, silent, inevitable, their black ships sliding into formation like the closing jaws of a predator. They outnumbered the humans 2-1. Their weapons carved apart the first line of defense in minutes. And yet humanity did not break. Captain Marin Holt of the battleship Iron Resolve led the charge. Rather than forming a rigid wall, the humans scattered, darting in unpredictable arcs. They fought not with elegance, but with chaos, their ships darting close enough to scrape hull against enemy armor before peeling away. While alien fleets preferred order, symmetry, and precision, humans reveled in unpredictability. Target their seams, Holt barked over the comm. Hit them where the plates twist, ignore the rest, make them bleed. And bleed they did. For the first time in millennia, an HFY warship shuddered beneath fire it could not deflect. A torpedo rammed into its distorted geometry, warping the impossible angles until its black hull cracked like broken glass. A cheer erupted across the human channels as the impossible became reality. An HFY ship was destroyed. The victory was not without cost. Half the human fleet burned in the void before the HFY withdrew, their prey proving sharper than expected. Yet Daedalus Prime stood, and the galaxy had seen what it had not believed possible. The humans had hurt the old ones. Word spread faster than fire in dry grass. Across the galaxy, refugees clung to the tale, soldiers whispered it in their barracks, and politicians spoke it with disbelief. The HFY were not invincible. They could be wounded. They could be fought. The Drask sneered, unwilling to admit weakness, but even they began to shift troops toward human fleets. The Serican pledged ships to join the defense. Even the shattered Vayari sent what remained of their navy to serve beneath human command. For the first time in living memory, unity began to form, not out of trust, not out of friendship, but out of the simple recognition that only humanity seemed willing to stand in the storm. Elias Varro stood again before the council, his voice echoing like a hammer striking steel. "They bleed," he said, "and if they bleed, we can break them, but not if we fight alone, not if we cling to old grudges. This is not a war of empires, this is a war for existence. Humanity has stood in the fire before, we will stand in it again, but if we fall, know this, you will fall with us." The chamber fell silent. The galaxy was beginning to listen. In the depths of the rim, the HFY gathered. One of their ships, torn open by human torpedoes, drifted in the dark, its impossible architecture cracked and bleeding shadow into the void. Yet even in their silence, they adapted. Shards of the destroyed vessel coalesced, reforming into new structures, twisting into sharper angles. The HFY learned quickly, and though humanity had drawn first blood, the old ones were only beginning to wake. The war spread like fire across dry grass. Within months of the first human victory, HFY fleets swept into multiple sectors at once. Colonies burned, stations were left as twisted wreckage, and the void was littered with drifting bodies and broken ships. Where they moved, civilization withered. Entire trade routes went silent, reduced to graveyards of shattered hulls. And yet, for all the horror, something remarkable was happening. The galaxy was uniting. Not willingly, not gracefully, but out of necessity. For every world that fell, another stood defiant beside human fleets. For every power that had once refused cooperation, another reluctantly sent its ships to gather under banners that carried humanity's mark. At the center of it all were the humans themselves. The Grand Fleet of Haldrin was the largest armada assembled in recorded memory. Human carriers floated alongside Veari cruisers, Serican strike craft, and even the massive warhulks of the Drask, whose commanders had finally bent their pride to survival. It was no easy alliance. Each species fought differently. The Serican darted with speed and precision, the Veari preferred graceful formation maneuvers, and the Drask hurled brute force into every battle. Their doctrines clashed, tempers flared, and mistrust festered in every council meeting. But humanity stitched them together. The human admirals did not demand conformity. They demanded creativity. Squadrons were mixed, tactics improvised. The humans encouraged chaos, weaving the disparate strengths of each species into strategies the HFY could not predict. The fleets became patchwork, unpredictable, wild, and effective. When the HFY struck at the Serican colonies, the coalition met them head-on. Human destroyers darted in close to distract their fire, Drask warhulks slammed into their flanks with devastating force, and Serican strike wings peppered their seams with pinpoint attacks. For the second time in the war, the impossible happened. The HFY lost a fleet. The HFY did not only strike from the void. On worlds they assaulted, they unleashed horrors. Their ground forces were not soldiers, as the galaxy understood them, but biomechanical nightmares, creatures of flesh fused with metal, forms bent into grotesque weapons. They poured across battlefields with silent precision, their bodies shifting in unnatural ways, their limbs unfolding into weapons. On the colony of Riven, humanity met them in the mud and the fire. The human army was outnumbered 3-1, holding shattered cities against wave after wave of HFY monstrosities. The fighting was brutal, savage, conducted street by street, building by building. Yet humanity did not yield. They fought with rifles when they could, knives and fists when the rifles ran dry. Civilians stood beside soldiers, wielding tools as weapons. The Battle of Riven lasted 37 days. When the coalition reinforcements finally arrived, they found the humans still standing among the ruins, bloodied but unbroken. They had held the line. News of Riven spread across the galaxy. The HFY could be fought on the ground, just as in space, and humanity's sheer refusal to break became legend, but victory carried a terrible price. Humanity's fleets took the brunt of every counterattack. Their colonies bore the heaviest casualties. When refugees fled the burning rim, it was human worlds that sheltered them. Humanity bled, and the galaxy watched, relieved it was not their own blood spilling so freely. Whispers began to spread. Some Serican envoys murmured that perhaps humans were too willing to sacrifice themselves. Drask commanders quietly speculated that the coalition was using humanity as a shield. Even among human ranks, bitterness simmered. Soldiers asked why their people were dying for races that had mocked and doubted them for so long. Elias Varro felt the weight of it. Standing in the war chamber of Haldrin, maps of burning sectors arrayed before him, he saw the numbers climbing higher each day, ships lost, colonies destroyed, lives extinguished. Humanity had taken the lead, but leadership meant sacrifice. He knew the galaxy would not thank them for it. They would only survive because of it. And still, unity trembled. In one council meeting, as reports poured in from multiple warfronts, the Drask representative slammed his clawed fist on the table. "Why must our fleets follow human command? We are warriors greater than any of you. Let us fight our own battles, not bleed for theirs." Elias's reply was calm, but his eyes burned. "Then fight your own battles, and watch your worlds burn one by one. Or fight with us, and we may live to see the stars tomorrow. The choice is yours." Silence followed, and though the Drask hissed and fumed, they remained, because they knew the truth. Without humanity, they would already be ashes. But the HFY were learning. At the Battle of Ceros, they adapted. Their black ships shifted formation to counter the coalition's chaos, anticipating human maneuvers before they happened. The fight was brutal, the coalition losing nearly a third of its strength before retreating. It was a sobering reminder. This enemy was ancient, patient, cunning. Humanity's unpredictability had given them the first victories, but the Eshar were not static foes. They evolved and they remembered. In the quiet after the battle, Elias Varro stood at the viewport of the Haldrin War platform once more, watching the stars. Humanity had led the galaxy into the storm, and they had not faltered. But the storm was growing stronger. Every battle cost more lives. Every victory felt narrower, harder to grasp. He clenched his fists behind his back. The galaxy had asked humanity to lead. Now it would have to follow humanity into the fire and perhaps never return. The war had grown long, and the galaxy was weary. For every battle won, two more seemed to be lost. The coalition fleets had struck the Eshar at Riven, at Syros, at the edge of the Serican frontier, but the victories were fleeting. The enemy did not value territory, nor did they cling to strongholds. They moved like predators, striking, feeding, and vanishing again into the shadows of space. They left behind only silence and ruin, forcing the coalition to stretch itself thinner and thinner across the spiral arms. Eshar incursions began to penetrate deeper. Whole sectors dimmed as communication went dark. Stations that had stood for centuries drifted as lifeless husks. On the Serican world of Karis, billions were swept away in days. The Eshar did not stay, did not occupy, did not rule. They erased. The galaxy had never known an enemy like this. Wars had been fought for conquest, for resources, for pride. This was something else entirely. At first, the Eshar seemed unbreakable machines, their ships impossible to decipher, their ground forces abominations of metal and flesh. But as the battles wore on, human archaeologists uncovered ruins left behind by civilizations that had faced them long ago. In those ruins, etched into stone and crystal, were truths that chilled the scholars to the bone. The Eshar were not conquerors. They were purgers. Their ancient reign had not been about power, it had been about fear. The only thing they sought was silence. Unity among the living was the one force they could not tolerate, because unity could threaten them. Their wars were not about empire, but about ensuring that no coalition of civilizations could ever grow strong enough to challenge them. The fragments spoke of worlds sacrificed to buy time, of races erased entirely when they dared to ally. Again and again, the message appeared. They come when life gathers. They scatter the fire so that no flame burns too brightly. The implication was terrifying. The coalition itself might have awakened them, the growing unity of the galaxy after centuries of war calling the predators back from their slumber. The coalition learned this truth too late. On the fortress world of Arathis, the coalition made its boldest stand yet. Human, Vayari, Serican, Drask, dozens of species stood shoulder to shoulder, their fleets arrayed in a shield wall around the planet. It was to be a symbol, a declaration to the galaxy that unity could hold against annihilation. The Eshar shattered it in 3 days. Their fleets came in numbers not yet seen, pouring from hidden vaults in the void. They adapted to coalition tactics, countering chaos with patterns more alien than thought itself. Human ships fought with their usual ferocity, ramming, boarding, detonating themselves to take enemies with them. The Drask hurled their massive warhulks into the fray, tearing black ships apart with claws and cannons. The Vayari sang battle hymns that shook the comms as their fleets dove into impossible maneuvers. And still, the Eshar consumed them. When Arathis fell, millions died on its surface. Entire armies were wiped away in silence. The fleet that limped away was half its original size, its survivors broken and hollow. The symbol of unity had become a grave. In the aftermath, the cracks widened. Refugee fleets clogged human space, begging for sanctuary. Resources stretched thin. Anger boiled over in council meetings. And then came the betrayal. The Cathari, a reclusive but powerful aquatic species, had always kept their fleets close to their watery homeworlds. They spoke little in council, but their technology was advanced and their ships formidable. When their representatives failed to appear at the next war summit, suspicions grew. The truth arrived days later, in the form of a burning Serican convoy ambushed on the edge of Cathari space, not by the Eshar, but by Cathari ships. The Cathari had struck a bargain. Whether they believed the Eshar would spare them, or whether they sought to survive by serving them, no one could say, but the betrayal was catastrophic. The Cathari revealed coalition routes, safe harbors, hidden caches. Their treachery allowed the Eshar to sweep through an entire sector, destroying a dozen worlds that had believed themselves safe. The council chamber erupted. "You see," roared the Drask commander, slamming his claws on the table hard enough to crack the wood. "We cannot trust each other. Unity is a lie. Better to stand apart and fight for our own blood." The Serican wept openly, their feathers shivering with despair. The Vayari demanded vengeance. And through it all, Elias Varro sat in silence, his hands clenched, his jaw set. Finally, when the chamber fell quiet, he rose. "You think unity is dead because of betrayal?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Then you are fools. Betrayal has haunted us since the dawn of time. But every time humanity has been betrayed, every time we have been left to burn alone, we endured. And we endure still. If the Cathari wish to kneel to extinction, let them. We will stand, and if you would survive, you will stand with us." His words did not erase the bitterness. They did not heal the wounds. But they kept the coalition from shattering entirely. Still, the war grew darker. Eshar fleets pressed deeper, their attacks more coordinated than ever before. Human colonies were drowning in refugees, their supplies stretched to breaking. Armies bled on battlefields across 100 worlds, never enough to hold the tide. The galaxy teetered on the edge of despair. And in the quiet corridors of Haldren Station, Elias Varro confessed to his most trusted allies what he had come to fear. "We may not win this war," he whispered. "We may only outlast it." Far across the rim, the Eshar gathered again, their black ships coiled around a dead star, their hulls bleeding shadows into the void. In their silence, in their patience, they built something vast, something that bent the very light around it. The galaxy did not yet know it, but the true storm was about to break. The fall of Arathis had nearly broken the galaxy. The betrayal of the Cathari had driven the knife deeper, but from ruin, sometimes fire is born. On Haldren Station, the council chamber was half empty. Many delegations had abandoned it after Arathis. Others sent only low-ranking envoys instead of leaders. Whispers echoed through the chamber that the coalition was finished, that it would scatter into isolated powers, praying the Eshar overlooked them. Elias Varro stood before them, his face gaunt with exhaustion. His hair had gone grey in the long years of war, and his shoulders carried the weight of a galaxy. Yet when he spoke, his voice rang like steel. "You are afraid," he said. "So are we. You are angry. So are we. You are bleeding. So are we. But hear me, if you scatter, if you cling to your own borders, you will die alone. That is what the Eshar want. That is what they have always wanted. They do not fear our ships. They do not fear our weapons. They fear only one thing." He struck his hand against the table. "They fear us together." The chamber was silent. The words rang in every mind, from the crystalline tones of the Thriss to the rasping breaths of the Drask. Elias continued. "We humans have stood in the fire before. We have been underestimated, mocked, betrayed, but we endure. We endure because we fight not for pride, not for empire, not for conquest. We fight for one another. That is the weapon the Eshar cannot unmake. And if you would live, you must wield it with us." There was no thunderous applause, only silence heavy and brittle. Yet beneath that silence something shifted. A spark flickered in weary hearts. Hope, faint but real, kindled once more. The coalition did not collapse. It hardened. The war turned bloody in a new way. Humanity, now firmly at the head of the coalition, launched daring strikes into enemy-occupied systems. These were not glorious conquests, but brutal raids. Ambushes in asteroid belts, hit-and-run attacks on supply lines, sudden strikes into enemy formations that scattered before the Eshar could adapt. Human ships often did not return. Crews volunteered for suicide missions, knowing their sacrifice could buy victories elsewhere. The Serican adapted, weaving their speed into human chaos. The Drask hurled their warhawks into battles with newfound discipline, striking where human tacticians directed them. Even the wounded Vayari found courage again, their fleets diving in fiery arcs that blazed across the void. Each battle cost dearly, but for the first time since the war began, the Escher bled more than they gained. The Coalition's turning point came at Tero's Gate, a wormhole nexus linking 3 sectors of the Rim. If the Escher seized it, half the galaxy would be cut off. The battle was apocalyptic. Escher ships poured from the void in endless waves. The Coalition fleet stood against them, a wall of mismatched vessels welded into unity by sheer necessity. Human destroyers rammed enemy cruisers, detonating themselves in blossoms of fire. Drask warhawks locked claws into Escher dreadnoughts, tearing them apart piece by piece. Serican wings darted in and out of impossible gaps, striking weak points with surgical precision. At the heart of it all was the human battleship Iron Resolve. Captain Marin Holt, who had drawn first blood against the Escher months before, commanded from its bridge. The ship was battered, scarred from a dozen campaigns, but still unbroken. When the Escher unleashed a weapon that bent the fabric of the wormhole itself, Holt made the choice. All power to the drives, she ordered. The Iron Resolve hurled itself into the maw of the weapon, tearing the Escher device apart in a cataclysmic detonation. The wormhole collapsed, sealing the gate forever. Half the Escher fleet was destroyed in the implosion. The rest retreated. The Coalition was bloodied but victorious. The Iron Resolve and all aboard were gone, but their sacrifice had saved half the galaxy. Holt's name became a rallying cry whispered in bunkers, shouted in battle, etched onto the sides of ships. Iron Resolves, we do not break. For the first time since the war began, the Escher did not advance. For the first time, the Coalition seized the initiative. Worlds that had cowered behind walls sent their fleets once more. Refugees enlisted in human armies, swelling their ranks. Even the Drask, once arrogant and dismissive, began to look to human leaders not with scorn but with respect. The galaxy was beginning to believe. Yet in the void, the old ones did not sleep. Their black ships shifted once more, learning, evolving. Where chaos had once confused them, now they mirrored it, twisting into patterns that defied comprehension. At the edge of the Rim, whispers spoke of a new weapon, something vast, something capable of burning stars themselves. The Coalition's victories were real, but they were bought with blood, and the enemy was not done. Still, for the first time, the galaxy stood not in despair, but in defiance. And at its heart stood humanity, scarred, bleeding, and unbowed. The galaxy held its breath. The Escher had withdrawn, not far, not fully, but enough to stir unease in every system. They did not retreat out of fear, never out of fear. They were preparing. Scouts whispered of worlds consumed whole, of stars flickering and dying in unnatural silence. Entire constellations went dark, their light erased. From the ruins of Arathis to the shadowed gulfs of the Outer Rim, the same rumor spread. The Escher were forging something vast, something ancient, something that had slumbered since before any species learned to crawl. The Coalition called it the Black Star. When it emerged, even the most hardened veterans faltered. It was not a ship as mortals understood ships. It was a world wrought into a weapon, a sphere of seething obsidian, veined with fire that burned black instead of red. It hung in the void like a second sun, yet it gave no light, only hunger. Where it passed, stars dimmed, their brilliance leached away. The Escher had awakened a relic of their forgotten wars, a weapon that fed upon suns and turned their corpses into power. With it, they could unmake entire sectors, leaving only frozen husks in the dark. The Coalition's fleets trembled before its shadow. Even the Drask warlords, who once claimed no fear, spoke in hushed tones. Entire councils whispered of surrender, of scattering to the depths and hiding like prey. But humanity did not whisper. Humanity roared. Elias Varro stood once more before the gathered council, his voice raw with exhaustion, his eyes blazing with fire. "If you run, there will be no hiding," he told them. "This thing feeds on stars themselves. It will follow until every flame is gone. You cannot hide from the night it brings. You cannot wait for it to pass, because it will never pass. It will devour everything." His fist clenched against the table. Humanity will fight it, with stones, with steel, with blood and bone if we must. We will fight because there is no choice left. And if you would see your children live to breathe another dawn, then stand with us. Stand with us now, at the end of all things." The words lit sparks into fire. The Serican pledged their swiftest wings. The Vayari swore their shattered fleets would blaze one final time. Even the Drask bent their heads, growling assent. The coalition would fight, not scattered, not broken, together. The battle began at the edge of the dying star called Velos. The black star drifted into orbit, its engines not pushing but pulling, bending gravity itself. Tendrils of light lashed outward, sinking into the star below, draining its brilliance like blood from a wound. The sun flickered, spasmed, and began to die. Before it could collapse, the coalition struck. Human dreadnoughts plunged forward, their hulls bristling with scars and patched steel. Serican wings swept ahead in brilliant arcs, dancing through torrents of enemy fire. Drask warhulks slammed into Eshar dreadships, tearing them apart in battles of claw and flame. The void erupted into chaos, every starship in the coalition pouring its fury into the abyss. The black star answered. Its surface rippled like liquid obsidian, unfolding into vast apertures that spewed annihilation. Beams of unlight lanced through space, severing fleets in single strokes. Entire squadrons vanished, their light consumed, their wreckage drifting like ash. The weapon was not only power, it was inevitability, but the coalition did not break. Humanity led the charge again and again, ships hurling themselves against impossible odds, crews screaming their defiance as they plunged into fire. To destroy the Black Star, they would have to strike its heart. The plan was madness. A small strike force would pierce its defenses, slip through the great apertures when they opened, and land inside the weapon itself. Once within, they would overload its core, tearing it apart from within. The mission fell to humans. Of course it did. Aboard the strike cruiser Valiant Ashes, Captain Selene Ward prepared her soldiers. Veterans of Riven, survivors of the campaign of Ashes, men and women who had lived too long with death beside them. She looked into their faces, scarred, tired, resolute, and spoke softly. "This is the end," she said, "but it will not be theirs, it will be ours. Remember what we fight for, not victory, not glory. We fight so others may live, that is enough." They entered the Black Star. Inside, it was no machine as mortals understood machines. It was alive, a labyrinth of pulsing walls and veins of lightless fire. The Eshar had fused flesh and steel, turning world and weapon into one. The corridors shuddered like the insides of a beast, and everywhere guardians swarmed, twisted monstrosities of bone and metal, screaming without voices. The humans fought through them, step by bloody step. Rifles emptied, blades shattered, bare fists struck until knuckles split. The air stank of burning flesh and molten metal. Every meter cost lives, but still they pressed on, leaving their dead behind without pause. At the core they found it, a sphere of pure darkness, pulsing like a heart. It beat in time with the dying star outside, feeding upon its light. Tendrils lashed out, tearing at reality itself. Captain Ward placed the charges. Eshar monstrosities closed in, endless howling. One by one, the last humans held them back. Grenades, gunfire, knives, hands around throats. They fought until they could no longer stand. Ward stood alone at the end, her body broken, blood soaking her armor. She pressed her hand against the detonator. "For them," she whispered. She triggered the charges. The Black Star screamed. Its obsidian surface cracked, fire searing outward in wild veins. The void itself seemed to convulse as the weapon turned upon itself, its hunger devouring its own heart. The dying star of Velos flared one final time, brighter than it had in centuries, before the Black Star tore itself apart in a cataclysmic implosion. The shockwaves swept across the battlefield, obliterating the Eshar fleets that remained. Coalition ships, battered and broken, were hurled outward but endured. When the light faded, nothing remained of the Black Star but dust. In the aftermath, the void was silent. The Eshar did not retreat, they vanished. Their fleets withdrew into the gulfs from which they had come, silent as shadows, leaving only ruins behind. The coalition was shattered, its fleets crippled, its worlds burned, but it had survived, and the galaxy would remember who had stood at its heart. Humanity, bloodied and broken, but unbowed, had led them through the fire. Humanity had faced the Black Star and torn it down. The war was not won, not truly. The Eshar still lurked in the darkness, patient and waiting, but they had been wounded. They had been shown that the younger races could not be broken so easily, and for the first time in uncounted ages, the old ones feared.